You're listening to Radio Looks Listen. I'm your host, Steve Matthews. Thank you for joining me for episode, what is this? Episode 34. Yeah, 134, excuse me, 134. Radio Looks Listen. The title of tonight's episode is Jesuit Joe Awards Antichrist. Yeah, okay. I wasn't sure if I should use that title or not. It seemed maybe it was a little bit on the nose, but I thought, why not? Let's go for it. Anyway, welcome to this is a special Sunday evening edition of Radio Looks Listen. I don't normally do podcasts on Sundays, but I'm kind of in podcast mode right now. I had a really fantastic interview with a guest yesterday, Christian J. Pinto, or Chris Pinto from Adellum Films and from Noise of Thunder Radio. And he had put out a film, a documentary film, came out last summer, so it's summer of 2024, and it's called American Jesuits. And I finally had a chance. I've been trying to get him on the Trinity Foundation radio program for a while, and I finally got him on. We had a fantastic conversation. I was today I was finishing up doing the editing, so I could go ahead and get that out, get that posted. And Lord willing, I think that should be posted to the Trinity Foundation website probably tomorrow on Monday. That would be the 13th. I guess it would be Monday, maybe Tuesday, but probably Monday. Anyway, we'll see. It should be out soon. And I think I might even go ahead and put a link to that on my blog. It was just a fantastic interview. It was really, it was a lot of fun. It's always fun to talk to Chris, and I always learn so much when I talk to him. I love his research. I think he's very gifted, and he really relates. He organizes material and presents his material very well. And I think that if you're interested in sort of the kinds of things we talk about on this podcast, I think you're really going to like that podcast as well. Anyway, so like I say, I'm kind of in podcast mode, is doing some editing, and I didn't feel like writing anything tonight. And I usually write a blog piece on Sundays. But anyway, I thought I'd do a podcast here. And well, there's all kinds of interesting stuff going on in the world here over the past week. So it's not like there's any shortage of material to talk about. One thing that I wanted to talk about, I was going to talk today about Joe Biden's big trip to the Vatican, but as it turns out, things kind of changed. Joe Biden was actually supposed to go meet with Pope Francis in person. When I say Antichrist, that's what I'm talking about. As head of the church, of course, that is what the Pope is. That's the office of Antichrist. And Joe Biden was supposed to go over there and meet with the Pope in person, but due to all the wildfire business out in LA, apparently they canceled the trip. So the news is, on the other hand, instead of going to make an in-person trip, it said that Joe Biden awarded Pope Francis the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And it seems like Joe Biden's going out of his way to give the worst people in the world the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I think it's almost like I don't know, what do they call it, the kiss of death or something like that, but yeah, he's giving all these horrible people this Presidential Medal of Freedom. I know he gave one to George Soros, who is an anti-American subverter, and he gave another one to Hillary Clinton, who's also an anti-American subverter. And he's giving one, of course, to Antichrist, whose very mission in life is to subvert all liberty and equity and justice anywhere in the world where he can do so, including here in the United States. That's the man's job, and that's how he rolls. Antichrist, that is. And I somewhat joking, but actually it's not really a joke when I say that he's Joe Biden's boss. I mean, he really is. One of the things, in fact, when I was talking to Chris Pinto, he called Joe Biden, he called him an agent of the Jesuits, and I think that's true. I mean, if you look, I mean, Joe Biden has a long history of having close relationship with the Jesuits. He attends a Jesuit church in Washington, D.C. He's has a very long-standing personal relationship with the current Pope. So yeah, I mean, that's, and really, if you look at the policies that Joe Biden has implemented, all of his climate change policies, his immigration policies, all of this business of flooding the United States of America with millions upon millions upon millions of illegal aliens, that is the Vatican immigration policy that he's carrying out. And I've jumped up and down and rung the bell and shouted and played the fool, I guess, for years now, talking about the role of the Roman Catholic Church in America's immigration crisis. But it's true, and I cannot say this often enough. And maybe sometimes, maybe I hope I don't wear the topic out, but I think on the one hand, it's so important that it has to be talked about. But number two, nobody ever talks about it. So three, that leaves it up to me and other people like me to discuss this sort of thing. So anyway, that's something that I feel led to do, very much so, and I hope that it's borne some fruit. And I'm going to continue to do it because this is an extraordinarily serious issue. Anyway, so let's see what we got here, and we'll talk through a few stories today. And let's do a screen share here, and we'll start with our first story. So yeah, just talking about the deal here with Joe Biden and Pope Francis. So this is a story piece from the Vatican News, and it's got the headline: Joe Biden awards Pope Francis the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And let's see, it says that one of his final acts as leader of the United States, President Joe Biden conferred the Presidential Medal of Freedom with distinction. So this is a special award. It's not just a mere Presidential Medal of Freedom. It's the Presidential Medal of Freedom with distinction. The nation's highest civilian honor upon Pope Francis, the announcement was made during a telephone call between the two leaders on January 11th. So this was on Saturday. This was yesterday. The meeting, initially scheduled as an in-person audience at the Vatican on January 10th, was canceled due to the wildfire emergency in Los Angeles, which prevented Biden from traveling to Italy. And it talks about this phone call as a second dialogue between Francis and Biden here recently. Here's an official statement from the White House. As a young man, Jorge Bergoglio, that's Pope Francis. That's his actual name. Jorge Bergoglio sought a career in science before faith led him to a life with the Jesuits. Well, yeah. It's faith of a sort. It's not faith in God. For decades, he served the voiceless and vulnerable across Argentina as Pope Francis's mission of serving the poor has never ceased. A loving pastor, he joyfully answers children's questions about God. A challenging teacher, he commands us to fight for peace and protect the planet. No. And a welcoming leader, he reaches out to different faiths. The first pope in the Southern Hemisphere, Pope Francis, is unlike any other who came before. Well, that's true, in that he is the first Jesuit Antichrist. Above all, he's the people's pope, a light of faith, hope, and love that shines brightly across the world. Okay. Well, that's the kind of thing you would expect from Joe Biden. One of the things, in fact, when I was talking to Chris Pinto, he mentioned something too, and he's talked about this before. He's got a podcast called Noise of Thunder Radio. But if you listen to his podcast, from time to time, he will talk about South American Jesuitism. And, the Jesuits, South America is a real stronghold for the Jesuits. And Pope Francis is maybe the most obvious public example of that, since he's also the first Jesuit pope, but he's by no means the only example of powerful Jesuits in South America. So yeah, you have him as kind of the ultimate expression of South American Jesuitism, and of course our president, who has tons of Jesuit connections. I believe he may have I think he may have attended Jesuit school. I'm going to have to double check that, but I believe that was the case. But he has had he attends a Jesuit parish in Washington D.C. He goes to church there. They in fact, that parish elected to make sure that he receives communion. There are a lot of Catholic bishops who have called for Joe Biden to be cut off from receiving communion because of his stance on abortion. But the Jesuits said, "Oh, he's a good Catholic boy. We're going to go ahead and make sure that we don't embarrass our man in the White House," and so they make sure they take care of him. Interestingly enough, too, when he was sworn in as president, he put his hand on a Douay-Rheims Bible. Douay-Rheims, that's the Jesuit translation of the Bible. So that's something else to keep in mind there. This is this is an article here from NPR. It's got a headline that says Biden's meeting with Pope Francis will be both official and deeply personal. Now, this one goes back some time. This is actually back to 2021 when Biden made his first trip to Rome to meet with the Pope. And it just says here, ahead of Biden's visit with Pope Francis on Friday, a question was posed in the White House briefing about whether the meeting will be personal or formal. And the answer from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was both. And Biden is just the second Catholic president. While John F. Kennedy took pains to downplay his faith, Biden often places it front and center. He quoted St. Augustine in his inaugural address and regularly cites Pope Francis' speeches. So there you go. You've got this Jesuit president citing speeches from the Jesuit Pope. So anyway, so this is again, they have a long-standing relationship, Pope Francis and Joe Biden. In fact, the picture that you see here, if you can see this, it's on the video. It's got a caption that says, "Then Vice President Biden shakes hands with Pope Francis at Capitol Hill in Washington prior to the Pope's address to a joint meeting of Congress in 2015." So, and back here, you can see over to Biden's, I guess that's left. That is, I think that's John Boehner there, who was Speaker of the House at the time. John Boehner was a Republican. Well, he was Republican Speaker of the House in 2015, but he was himself educated at Jesuit Xavier University here in Cincinnati. He's actually a local politician from not far from where I live, and he went to Xavier University here, which is a Jesuit school, and he actually teamed up with Nancy Pelosi in 2014. Nancy Pelosi also has strong Jesuit connections, and the two teamed up to invite Pope Francis over. And it took about a year for this meeting to take place, but in 2015, they did bring him over to a great deal of fanfare. It's hard to believe it's been 9 years. Well, it'll be 10 years this fall. It was September 2015, so it was 9 years ago this past fall, and later this year it'll be 10 years. That's hard to believe that that much time has passed. It just seems like that was not very long ago at all. So anyway, I mentioned something here about. Well, in fact, here's an article. In fact, this was a piece sent to me by my friend Carolyn. Carolyn, thanks for sending this. She always sends me great stuff, and here's this kind of ties into the whole thing with Joe Biden and Pope Francis. And here's this particular piece of some news organization called Texas Scorecard, and it's got the headline. It says, "Is Catholic Charities helping bring illegal aliens to Fort Worth schools?" Now, I mean, I can already. I don't even have to read the article. I can tell you the answer to that question is yes. Of course, they're doing that because that's what they do. But let's go on to read this thing here. It says, Tarrant County GOP recently revealed that the organization, as Catholic Charities, is working with the school district to bring illegal alien children into the school district. New reports suggest that a local chapter of Catholic Charities is working with Fort Worth Independent School District to bring illegal aliens into the school district. It was previously reported that the Catholic Charities of Fort Worth had been incentivizing illegal immigration into Texas by helping illegal aliens obtain citizenship and handing out millions in taxpayer money. CCFW, so that's Catholic Charities of Fort Worth, has also been given nearly $1 billion tax dollars from the Biden administration. I call it the regime, but it says here, in fairness, Texas Scorecard, it says from the Biden administration's Department of Health and Human Services, which they funnel to illegal border crossers and other organizations funded by leftist billionaires George Soros and Bill Gates. Now, the International Newcomer Academy in Fort Worth, ISD, maybe it's Independent School District, is intended exclusively for unassimilated migrant children. So they have an entire school part of the Fort Worth School District that's dedicated exclusively to unassimilated migrant children. So how much, and it doesn't say anywhere in this article how much this school costs, but this cannot be cheap. I mean, you got to pay for just all the regular school costs, building, teachers, maintenance, all the stuff that would normally go with the school. And on top of that, you probably have to have all kinds of language assistance and things of this sort. And notice the name of it too is Newcomer. Now, I did back on Reformation Day, gave a talk on a position paper that was put out in 2003 by the American Conference of Catholic Bishops and the Mexican Conference of Catholic Bishops. And basically it was a position paper on how they can promote the invasion of the United States with a migrant, with illegal aliens. And one of the terms that they used there, that was the term newcomer. And that was their sort of euphemism for illegal alien. They've got a whole school there in Fort Worth, funded by taxpayers of Fort Worth, among other things. And I don't know how much they have to pay for that, but again, it can't be cheap. And they call it the Newcomer Academy. So, surprise, surprise. They just, the treasonous bishops, they just carry the same talk, the same concept over, and they get the school named this way. Because you can't have the International Illegal Alien Academy. You can't have an International Newcomer Academy, though. The academy teaches children in grades 6 to 9 to orient studies to U.S. schools, develop basic communicative, academic, oral, and written English proficiency, continue to develop knowledge and skills in core content area subjects. Okay. Oh, and it says so that students can transition to the next component of secondary ESL program. ESL is English as a second language. The most common countries of origin include Mexico, Myanmar, Bhutan, Congo, and Iraq. And the common language is spoken in Spanish, Nepali, Swahili, Burmese, Karen, and Arabic. So there you go. If you happen to live in Fort Worth, that's your tax dollars at work. You get to spend all, probably millions upon millions of dollars a year educating, kids that shouldn't be in the United States. And and someone's going to say, "Well, are you mean to tell me that these kids should be sent home?" Yes, yeah, they should be, and their family should be sent home. It is not the job of the American people to feed, house, clothe, and educate foreigners, especially those who these people who do not come here, who come here contrary to our laws. They need to all go back. They need to be deported. And someone might say, "Well, that's unloving." Well, allowing this stuff to go on is unloving toward my American neighbors. And my Americans are my neighbor. I mean, I think it's interesting how anytime there's a discussion about immigration, it's always, there's all these, you're always implored to, oh, you're supposed to care for your neighbor. You're supposed to provide all the, give all this charity and this type of thing. Well, there's at least a couple of objections to the way Rome typically frames the issue. I mean, in the first place, my neighbor, my fellow Americans are my neighbors. I mean, they're quite literally my neighbors. They're much more my neighbors than somebody from a foreign country. So there's that. But number two, on top of that type of thing, again, in the Bible, in Christian teaching, I mean, the Bible encourages Christians to be charitable. But charity is always giving of your own things. It's always giving of your own time. It's giving of your own resources. Christian charity and government welfare are not the same thing. And all of this stuff that is promoted by Rome, promoted by the Biden regime, all of this stuff is really the theft of taxpayer dollars. Let's go back and look at that paragraph I quoted earlier here. CCFW, again, Catholic Charities of Fort Worth, has also been given nearly $1 billion from the Biden administration's Department of Health and Human Services. In other words, just this one chapter of Catholic Charities. I mean, there's lots and lots of there's Catholic Charities all over the country. I mean, there's a Catholic Charities of Southwestern Ohio, where I live. And there's probably Catholic Charities that cover every square inch of the United States. So this is just one chapter of Catholic Charities. They were given nearly $1 billion by the Biden regime. Just this one. So what about all these other Catholic charities? What about all these other throughout the country? How much money is this organization getting from the American taxpayer to continually work to subvert the very taxpayers who are being tapped to hand this money over to them? In other words, you and I, as American taxpayers, we're paying for our own displacement and destruction. I guess that's great work if you can get it. I mean, that's a sort of, I have to, in a way, I almost have to tip my hat to Catholic Charities and some of these other organizations, because yeah, that is true evil genius. I mean, to get you and me to actually pay for our own replacement, displacement, and destruction. But that is truly evil genius, and I guess in a way I kind of have to grudgingly salute them for their industriousness. Certainly not for their righteousness, but certainly for their industriousness. Yeah, I can't say that they're lazy people. Now, what's interesting, and again, this is something that came out when I was talking to Chris Pinto yesterday. But he was talking about how this desire by the Church of Rome to flood the United States with Roman Catholics, with illegal aliens, has been going on. Has been present for a very long time. This is not a new thing. This actually goes back to the mid 19th century, and maybe even earlier than that. I would suspect earlier, but there's certainly strong evidence that it was going on by the 1850s. And Chris referenced a book by a gentleman by the name of Charles Chineke. Now, that's a name that if you're an evangelical, if you're a Protestant, you may have heard of him. He was actually a very famous individual in the 19th century, and he was a French. He was born in Canada. He was French Canadian, and he was raised Roman Catholic, and he eventually left the Roman Catholic Church, and he was saved and left the Roman Catholic Church. He became a Presbyterian minister. He was a close friend of Abraham Lincoln and a big supporter of Abraham Lincoln. Chineke lived in Illinois. In fact, he founded a town in Illinois called St. Anne's, and while he was still a Roman Catholic. And while he was still a Roman Catholic priest, he was actually defended in court by a young lawyer by the name of Abraham Lincoln. And so I think that's probably where he and Lincoln first, maybe that was when they first met, and they were friends, right up through the time that Lincoln was killed. But anyway, in this, he wrote a couple of major books. One was called 50 Years in the Church of Rome, and the second one was called 40 Years in the Church of Christ. And in this particular book, 40 Years in the Church of Christ, he talks about there was a meeting that was held. I want to see, let's see if I go back here. He said this was in 1852, and he talks about a meeting of these Catholic bishops. Oh, no, excuse me. The meeting was in the spring of 1853 so he says at Buffalo. I suppose he's probably talking about Buffalo, New York. But anyway, this was at the time when Chineke was still a Roman Catholic priest. And he was apparently present at this meeting. And I'll read just a little bit of this. He says, through his influence, a large assembly principally composed of priests, to which I was invited, met at Buffalo in the spring of 1853. But what was his disappointment when he saw the greater part of those priests were sent by the bishops of the United States to oppose and defeat his plans. He vainly spoke with the most burning eloquence for the support of his pet scheme. The majority coldly answered him, quote, "We're determined like you to take possession of the United States and rule them. But we cannot do that except by acting secretly and making use of the utmost wisdom." So, I mean, here's, apparently there is this one priest that wanted to come up with a plan to take over the United States. And I guess his fellow priests were saying, well, we agree with you, but we don't agree with your methods. So it wasn't, they didn't come back and say, well, maybe we shouldn't be trying to subvert the government of the United States. No, they were all for doing that. But they just wanted to go about it a bit differently. And Chineke continues. He says, if our plans are known, they will surely be defeated. What does a skillful general do when he wants to conquer a country? Does he scatter his soldiers over the farmlands and spend their time and energies in plowing the field and sowing the grain? No, he keeps them well united around his banners and marches at their head to the conquest of their strongholds, the rich and powerful cities. The farming countries then submit and become the price of the victory, without moving a finger to subdue them. So it is for us. Silently and patiently we must mass our Irish Roman Catholics in the great cities of the United States, remembering that the vote of our poor journeyman, even though he be covered with rags, has much weight in the scale of power as the millionaire Astor, and that if we have two votes against his one, he will become as powerless as an oyster. So essentially, they're trying to find a way to hack the American Republic. And the plan of doing this is by flooding the United States with Catholic immigrants. In this case, they specifically talk about Irish Catholic immigrants. Let us then multiply our votes. Let us call our poor but faithful Irish Catholics from every corner of the world and gather them in the very hearts of those proud citadels which the Yankees are so rapidly building under the names of Washington, New York, Chicago, Buffalo, Albany, Troy, etc. Under the shadow of these great cities, the Americans consider themselves as a giant and unconquerable race. They look upon the Irish Roman Catholics with utmost contempt, as only fit to dig their canals, sweep their streets, and work in their kitchens. Let no one awake these sleeping lions today. Let us pray God that they may sleep and dream their sweet dreams a few years more. How sad will be their awakening, when with our outnumbering votes we would turn them all forever from every position of honor, power, and profit. What will those hypocritical sons and daughters of the fanatical Pilgrim Fathers say when not a single judge, not a single teacher, not even a single policeman will be elected if he's not a devoted Irish Catholic? What will those so-called giants think when they say of their matchless shrewdness and ability when not a single senator or member of Congress will be chosen if he's not submitted to our Holy Father, the Pope? And they continue on in this vein. But what this is replacement migration. And this is a particular type of immigration war. I mean, this is immigration as warfare. Okay, this isn't people coming and saying, "Oh, what a country!" I mean, this kind of thing. No, I mean, this is actually organized immigration with the purpose of subverting the United States of America. This is in 1853. Okay, so this is what 172 years ago. 172 years. So, I mean, all of this stuff that you're seeing going on, the headlines with all these millions of people pouring across their borders because Joe Biden invited them all in, our Jesuit Roman Catholic president enacting the immigration policies of the Vatican. All the stuff you're seeing, this stuff has been in the works. It's been planned at least 170 plus years. And who knows? It may have been before that. But I mean, Chinike's writing, I suspect probably it was going on before that. But again, going back just 172 years, that's pretty impressive. I mean, they've been working on it that long. And, one of the reasons, and again, I'll mention what Chris Pinto said. One of the reasons he thinks that Donald Trump has gotten so much pushback is because he's going after the heart of the matter. I mean, immigration is an absolutely key component of Rome's immigration war on the United States. And there's even a particular word for that kind of thing going on. It's called irredentism. Irredentism, one definition of that is just Jesuit immigration warfare. And that's what you're seeing going on. What we're seeing here with the outgoing Biden regime is an example of irredentism. It's the Jesuits using immigration as a tool of war on the United States of America. And there's more that one could say about this, but I'll leave it at that for the moment. Anyway, so much for that. Now, here's something else. This is another interesting little bit of evidence from the 19th century. The 19th century, it's absolutely fascinating. And I'll reference something else that Chris Pinto talked about. He talked about the just huge amount of literature that was written in the 19th century by American Christians, warning other believers of the dangers that Rome represented to the liberties of the American Republic. And there's an absolute ton of literature out there, and most all of it's been forgotten. I think probably Charles Chineke might be the best known of the writers from the 19th century who talked about these things. But there's a lot of really great stuff that was written, but which unfortunately, for all that, did not have the effect of putting a stop to Rome's attack on our Constitution and on our liberties. Here's another example. This is actually a book. You can see this on the video here. It's kind of interesting how I came across this book. I was reading, I think it was a column by a pretty well-known conservative columnist, Ann Coulter. And she was talking about a book that was promoting, Roman Catholic immigration theory. Um, it's called Machine Made, and the book was about all these big 19th century political machines that were set up in the United States. You think of like probably the best known one, but not the only one by any means, was Tammany Hall in New York City. And I went ahead and I got a copy of that book, Machine Made. And when I was reading that book, I found a reference to another book. And the name of that book is Romanism and Politics, Tammany Hall, the Stronghold of Rome. And so I immediately went on to Google Books to research this thing. I want to see if I can find a copy of this. Well, I couldn't find a copy anywhere. None had been scanned. But this book, it was referenced by Google Books, and I found that there were a couple of copies. There was one in the Columbia University Library, and there's also one in the Cornell University Library. Well, I did some research, and I found out that Cornell University actually had a thing set up, a program set up, where you could request them to scan one of the books for a price. It wasn't terribly expensive, like $60 or something. So anyway, I applied, sent them the money, and I had them scan a copy of this book, Romanism and Politics, Tammany Hall, the Stronghold of Rome. And it's actually more of a booklet. It's about 30 pages long. It was published in 1887. And it was written by a gentleman by the name of Joseph Hartwell, who's a Protestant minister. Now, I don't know. I haven't been able to find any more biographic details of Joseph Hartwell to date, but I probably need to go back and do some additional searching. Maybe he was, I assume, kind of from the way he writes, it sounds like he probably lived in New York City, because he writes kind of extensively about New York politics and seems to have a lot of knowledge about it. But what I want to do is I want to just scroll down. There's kind of a money quote here. And when I read this thing, when I first got this a couple of years ago, it just really knocked me out of my seat. And I want to share that here with you. And this is what he writes. He says, quote, "For long years, we have heard of Tammany Hall." Now, Tammany Hall, I'll just this is my own comment here. Tammany Hall was in the late 19th century up through the early, maybe the first few decades of the 20th century. That was the most powerful Democrat organization in New York City. I mean, essentially it was the New York City Democrats. And they were famously powerful, and they were famously corrupt. They were as corrupt as the day is long. They're just noted for that sort of thing. So anyway, going back to Joseph Hartwell here, he says, quote, "For long years we have heard of Tammany Hall. The political parties and intelligent citizens have regarded it as a vile hole where ugly creatures live and breed year after year. And yet, who has given a definition of Tammany Hall? The editors of our papers, political or religious? No. Let us try the following definition. Tammany Hall is simply the political organization of the Roman Catholic Church, with a Bishop Hughes or a Cardinal McCloskey or Archbishop Corrigan at its head, and a Fernando Wood, a William Treat, or a John Kelly for his fugleman." Now, the word fugleman is kind of an odd word to us. It just means mouthpiece. So these bishops, they were the head of the thing, but these other guys, Fernando Wood, William Treat, John Kelly, he says, they're his mouthpieces. The William Treat, I believe that's the famous Boss Tweed. If you look up Boss Tweed, he was supposedly the head of Tammany Hall, but according to what Joseph Hartwell says here, he was really more of a front man. And not really the guy that was principally in charge. It was the Roman Catholic Church hierarchy in New York City that was in charge. So let's go back to Hartwell, and this is what he continues. This is Hartwell continuing. He says the proper name for it, that is Tammany Hall, the proper name for Tammany Hall is Jesuit Hall. By this name it should be called, and by none other. For name and nature should correspond, so that when the one is called, the other should be understood. And that would help guide both the mind and the action of the American people. The object of this organization has been and is to put money and power and money into the Romish Church, or the papal conspiracy, as Dr. Edward Beecher persistently calls it. It would not have looked so well for the high prelates and priests of Rome to stand before the American people where they could see them doing the work which bosses Tweed and Kelly did. After Tweed died in prison, someone was needed to take his place, and we informed that Cardinal McCloskey helped and encouraged John Kelly in the work which he did. But would so high an official of the Pope stoop to such an act? No, if we are to judge from the ridiculous eulogies recently bestowed upon them by our papers. Anyway, so he continues on here, but it's very interesting, um, and he cites this other fellow, this Dr. Edward Beecher. He was I can't remember what his relationship. You've probably heard of Harriet Beecher Stowe. She was the famous. She wrote the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. They were a bunch of different Beechers that were prominent people, prominent ministers, this type of thing. And I'm pretty sure that Edward Beecher is in some way he's part of that same family. But it's interesting. This Dr. Edward Beecher called the Roman Church. He called it the papal conspiracy. So people knew about this stuff. And I think it's interesting too here when you read through what Joseph Hartwell says. Essentially, he's confirming the success of this plot that Charles Chineke had talked about over 30 years earlier. Remember, Chineke, he was talking about that meeting where all these priests were and about how they wanted to take over the United States by flooding the cities with all these Irish Catholics. And they did so. So that was in 1853. And then here you get this booklet talking about called Tammany Hall, the Stronghold of Rome. This is published in 1887. So we're talking about 34 years later. And what do you see here? You see the results of that. I would submit to you that there's a connection between these things. So that's kind of interesting. So I mean, all this Jesuit immigration warfare has been going on against the United States for a very, very long time, and it needs to be pointed out who's the principal driver of this. Now, the Roman Catholic Church is not the only driver of this type of thing, but it is the principal one. There are other organizations, for instance, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. It's a Jewish organization. They are a big promoter of this type of thing. In fact, the current the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, he is Jewish, and he sat on the board of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society prior to his taking the position in the Biden administration, his current position. And of course, Mayorkas was kind of Joe Biden's right-hand man in flooding the United States with these millions upon millions of illegal aliens. So anyway, that's just a little review of immigration warfare and what's going on. And I think it's important, again, it's very, very important for Protestants to point this stuff out. Who is doing these things? And again, principally, not exclusively, but principally, this is the realm of the Roman Catholic Church state. I want to move on to something else. There's, of course, one of the huge stories this past week. I mean, I think it's probably shocked all of us, is what's going on out in Los Angeles, and all of the wildfires and the death and the destruction. I mean, goodness, you've probably seen those videos out there. And I mean, it looks like they got nuked. I mean, these neighborhoods, whole swaths, this block after block after block, just devastated, and you just feel terrible for the people that have to suffer through that. I don't wish that type of thing on anyone. But here's an article by this fella, by a Midwestern doctor. This fella, I believe he's a man. He writes, so I guess anonymously, and he actually does some pretty good work. He was actually pretty good very good during COVID. He was a big skeptic of the jabs. And let's see there's something he talks about in here about the cause of some of these fires. Let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. Let me read through this paragraph. It's talking about the catastrophic bungles which collectively resulted in higher taxes in California, being harder and harder for residents to stay in the state. Oh, in fact, he's talking here about Gavin Newsom. In fact, he specifically talks about there are four intertwined San Francisco families that pretty much run California. He includes the Newsoms and the Pelosi's. Well, both of those families, interestingly enough, have very close ties to the Jesuits. We were just talking about the Jesuits with respect to immigration. Gavin Newsom himself, he went to Santa Clara University, which is a Jesuit university. And interestingly enough, I was looking this up earlier today, and if you go on, if you look it up on Wikipedia, if you look at the entry for Santa Clara University on Wikipedia, it says the motto of Santa Clara University is ad maiorem Dei gloriam, to the greater glory of God. That's a Latin saying. It means to the greater glory of God. Well, that is, if you know anything about the Jesuits, that is the motto of the Jesuits. That's the motto of the Jesuit order. It also happens to be the motto of the University of Santa Clara University, which is a Jesuit university. So I guess it's not surprising that there would be a connection there, that they would have the same motto. So yeah, Gavin Newsom, he had someone recently said that they thought when he smiled, he looks like the devil. Or at least how you might imagine the devil to look. And I agree. I mean, he really does. I mean, there's some people, it's interesting how some people, there are some people that really wear their evil on their faces. You can see that sometimes with these mafia bosses. They have this, I don't know how to describe it other than to say it's a very hardened look on their face. And with Gavin Newsom, I mean, you can just see that guy is evil. Uh, just look at him, and I that's all I can say about it. It's kind of hard for me to even really articulate it, but he really does wear his evil on his face, and he is a Jesuit tool. But it details some of the problems there in California. It says talks about the recurring wildfire problem, essentially due to California's climate. Wildfires are a regular issue. However, rather than adopting policies which can prevent these fires from becoming catastrophic, that is, for example, controlled burns, forestry management, making sure communities have sufficient firefighting water, infrastructure, or fixing the power lines. More and more money has gone into suppressing the wildfires, which in turn has caused the subsequent ones to burn even hotter. So instead of taking a long view and working to over the long term lower the threat of catastrophic wildfires, they just kind of go in and just put out fires, just as they come up. As such, devastating fires are becoming more and more common, but despite an uproar each time for steps to be taken so the next one does not create profound devastation, nothing gets done and a worse one follows. While spending on wildfire fighting services continue to spiral out of control. So there's that whole issue. That's one problem. The other thing that has been pointed out. In fact, I was talking to a friend in law enforcement today, and he was just apoplectic about the way the fire department and things like this are run out in California. I mean, you have all these lesbians who are the heads of the fire chiefs and this type of thing, and there was one of them in particular that she was there talking, and and she was talking about. I guess she'd been asked, well, what if these women firefighters, what if they can't, they're not strong enough to carry a man out of a fire, and her response was something to this effect. It was like, well, he just happened to be in the wrong place. Well, that's not really an answer now, is it? That's not a very adequate answer. But you've got all this these DIE hires out there in the Los Angeles Fire Department. Here's a picture. This is from X, but it shows a picture, and I don't know the background of this, so I don't want to comment too much on it. But it shows this bone dry reservoir, and of course, one of the things you've probably read about this past week is how the fire hydrants went dry because there was no water being held in reserve to be able to put these fires out. And I know California had a really bad drought for a number of years, but I understand that in the last year or two, it's actually there's been an abundance of rain, and so they could have been storing up water this time, but they didn't. So anyway, yeah, there's really just some. I mean, this entire thing was preventable, but unfortunately, it has been allowed to deteriorate. I guess perhaps one possible good thing that could come out of this, if you can find a silver lining, I think this is going to really damage Gavin Newsom's political career. Maybe it'll even get him out of the governor's seat. But I think certainly this is going to haunt him on a nationwide level. Yeah, it's going to make it harder. I mean, I think he's kind of considered, one of the A-list candidates to be the Democrat nominee in 2028, and this might be kind of knocking him down a peg. It's certainly not helping his case. Let's put it that way. Certainly not helping his case. Let's see what we got here. Oh, and the last thing that I wanted to cover here, and this is such a sad story. Um, there's this. This is a headline. This is from Paul Craig Roberts, but he says the despicable British government gave immigrant invaders the right to rape underage girls. So, if you've followed any of this stuff over the past couple weeks, um, this has been a story that's been going on for decades, where they have brought in a lot of these immigrants. In particular, it seems like they seem to be Pakistani immigrants, and they end up becoming these rape gangs where they rape these underage British girls, and nobody does anything about it. They just let this go on year after year after year after year after year. And in fact, if anybody complains about it, it's not the people that are doing the raping that get punished, it's the people who complain about the raping that get punished. I'll read just a little bit of it here. He says, Elon Musk holds UK Prime Minister Starmer accountable. And let's see here. Gangs across the UK involving men predominantly Pakistani origin raped, tortured vulnerable girls on an industrial scale over the past 30 years, with multiple independent inquiries indicating systemic failures to investigate the crimes. According to 3 separate reports published in 2013, 2014, and 2015, local politicians and police alike opted to cover up the rapes, partly out of fear that bringing the perpetrators to justice would be seen as racist. Musk launched an attack on Starmer earlier this week, accusing him of failing to tackle the grooming gangs issue or to properly investigate numerous assaults on underage girls at the time when the incumbent prime minister led the UK's Crown Prosecution Service from 2008 to 2013. So Starmer, I guess he headed up the Crown's Prosecution Service and did nothing about that in the 5 years he was in office. Among other things, the billionaire, talking about Musk, called the grooming gangs a state-sponsored evil, stating Starmer was complicit in the rape of Britain and should not only resign but also face criminal charges. Well, you know what? It's hard to argue with any of that. Sometimes Elon Musk, he's kind of a different sort of guy, and sometimes he'll do things that you get, or say things maybe to get you frustrated, and sometimes he'll say some things that are actually quite good. And I'm glad that he put a focus on this, because the elite, the government leaders in Britain, have done everything they can to sweep this under the rug. And by shining a light on this, Musk has really embarrassed Keir Starmer, and he deserves to be embarrassed. But I mean, let's face it, Keir Starmer is not the only one that's involved in this. I don't know that the Conservatives have been any better. They've had plenty of opportunities to do something about this, and they never did anything about it. Yeah, and I don't understand how a government can allow this to go on. That's one of the saddest, most really appalling things I've ever heard. I mean, that is the very purpose of government. Think about what the Apostle Paul says. The Apostle Paul in Romans 13, he says that the civil magistrate is God's minister to you for good. That he does not wield the sword in vain, but uses an avenger to inflict wrath on those who practice evil. Not an exact quote. It's kind of a close to a quote, but maybe not exactly. But I think you get the idea. The purpose, the Apostle Paul tells us, is that the civil magistrate is to punish those who practice evil. He's an avenger to execute wrath, on these people who practice evil. Well, if raping underage girls is not an example of evil, I don't know what is. This is a complete, utter systemic failure of government, probably at the local level and maybe all the way on up to the national level, of doing the principal thing that is its job, its God-appointed job, and that is to punish those who practice evil and reward the good. And I just when I look at this, I get so upset. I'm an American. I'm not even. I'm not British. And I read this, and I'm just appalled. And let's pray that justice is done in Britain. and that you have Christian men do what they should do, and really get in and really see to it that justice is done. This needs to happen. This cannot be allowed. You can't have a country and function like this. There was as you might imagine, there was a lot of comments on X about this, and here's one that I thought, and I think this is true. And this this one guy writes, he says, the only possible way to understand this is that the UK elite class approved of and facilitated the rape of their daughters by foreign gangs. And yeah, I think that's true. And he's responding to another post that well, I'll read the other post here. It says, betrayal. In a stunning betrayal of British families, Prime Minister Keir Starmer is ordering Labour members of Parliament to block a national inquiry into the rape gangs plaguing the United Kingdom. And they did that this past week. They had a vote in Parliament, and they voted overwhelmingly, I think about 3-1, to not move forward with investigating the rape gangs. And this other fellow, Aaron McIntyre, I think he's like isn't he associated with the Blaze or something with Glenn Beck? But I think he's certainly right in what he says here, and that is, that the only possible way to understand this is that the UK elite class approved of this. I mean, they could have put a stop to this at any time, but they didn't. So apparently, they wanted this to happen, and you can argue about why that is. I mean, I think apparently what they're trying to do is subjugate their own people. I mean, everywhere in the Western world, with a few exceptions, the governments of the nations are actually at war with their own people. The Biden regime is at war with the American people. The government of Great Britain is at war with the British people. The government of Canada is at war with the Canadian people. The government of Germany is trying to destroy the German people. The same in France, and again, just about everywhere in the West. And it's a remarkable thing to watch. I think probably a lot of this ties back into the Roman Catholic Church and their desire to destabilize and subject nations, to weaken nations, to subvert them, and bring them into a globalist system. This is something I've talked about a number of times, and just to kind of round that idea out, what you're seeing is a new world order assault on sovereign nations, on the nation state. And the whole idea of the nation state, the modern nation state, the modern system of international relations we have, there's actually a name for it. Where you have these independent nation states that are self-governing, that don't have to answer to an outside power. It's called the Westphalian World Order. The WWO, you hear about the NWO, the New World Order. Well, this is the Westphalian World Order. The Westphalian World Order says that nation states have a right to govern their own territories, according to their own laws, their own customs, without outside interference. And of course, that absolutely just infuriates the Vatican. And that book that I quoted from, that 40 Years in the Church of Christ, where Charles Chineke is recounting this meeting of all these priests trying to find ways to subvert the United States. They talk about this. They talk about overthrowing the United States and subjecting it to the Pope. And that is how the Vatican operates. And again, we don't talk about this stuff. This kind of thing has been excised out of our history books, but this is real stuff. And I think that's what you're seeing going on in Britain here as well. This is an attempt to subvert the British nation, and it's being aided, it's being abetted, it's being carried out with the approval of the elite class of Britain. They have abandoned their own people. They have committed treason against their own nation. And Elon Musk talked about how, in his view, in that article, that Starmer should face criminal charges. Well, yes, he should. Now, there's a penalty for treason, and let's just say it's not a pleasant penalty. But I think that is actually what these people have done, that have allowed this stuff to go on, both in Great Britain and in other nations as well. Anyway, I think that's about all I have here for tonight. We just want to wrap up. Thank you all for listening. To everybody who's listening on the live stream, thanks for joining me. It's always great to have you here. And I hope to see you again here sometime in the near future. Until then, may the Spirit of truth guide you in all truth as you read and study God's Word.